Alright, welcome back to the flight deck. We're about 13 minutes into the flight and we're cruising along at flight level 350 at ground speed of about 450 knots, which is a little over 510 miles per hour. They estimate another 36 minutes or so in flight before we land, but that means that we only have 12 minutes before we start our descent. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the cockpit, at least some of the elements that you haven't already seen. I think you've probably seen a good deal of the overhead panel by now, but we start here on the upper left-hand corner. That's the IRS. The IRS, or Inertial Reference System, is kind of a secondary navigational system. The primary navigation system constantly polls VORs and other ground-based navigational aids, and but when you're outside the range of ground-based navigational aids, such as on a transoceanic flight, you need an inertial reference system which will instantly ascertain your position based on gyroscopic motion sensed based on the inputted initial latitude and longitude. Then you've got the yaw damper. You've already seen the hydraulic pumps. There's the APU, which is the auxiliary power unit, basically a mini engine, if you will, in the tail of the aircraft that's used when you're on the ground. And you'd switch it on with this right here, and you've got the windshield wipers. I've already showed you the anti-ice. You've got the fuel indicators, fuel pumps. You can actually, if we had the center pumps, if we had any fuel in the center, we'd initially have the pumps on. And when we ran out of fuel in the center tank, we turned them off, and they're off right now. You can also open cross-feed valves between the left and right fuel tanks. And let's see what else. Emergency lights, the engine start, which we already saw. The ram air turbine, or the RAT, is a tiny propeller in the belly of the aircraft, and if we were to lose both engines, it would automatically deploy and provide us some power. We've got window heat, cargo heat. What else? Passenger signs for smoking and seat belts, and also the cabin altitude. That's pretty much it for the overhead panel. Coming back now to the panel we see before us. You've got airspeed indicator. You can see the flight deck of a 767 is basically a mixture of what are typically called glass instruments and then what you might call traditional or steam gauge analog instruments. Starting on the left, you have the airspeed indicator, which repeats the same information from the primary flight display. Anytime you see like a barber pole red striped area, that's a do not exceed point. So you can see we're at 264 knots. We don't want to exceed, I guess, about 280 knots. So there's about a 20 knot buffer there. You've got the distance away from the VOR DMEs. DME stands for distance measurement equipment. And then you've got the radials that we're tracking, and you can see the if we go to our FMS, you go to navigational radio page, you can see the MQO and VBG VORs respectively are what we're tracking right now, and you also see those. Looks like we just switched to the AVE VOR, which is this guy right here, and there's the MQO. You can see the radials, which are represented by these arrows here in the compass, and the VOR frequencies. And this is the horizontal situation indicator, which is basically the overhead map that we've been seeing. Distance from here to here is 160 nautical miles. You can see we've sort of got another compass here. We're heading 311, and we're 4.5 nautical miles away from the next waypoint, which I guess is Sino, and this is the time in Zulu that we estimate reaching that waypoint. Here's the primary flight display. It shows us that we've got the auto throttle, autopilot engaged with lateral and vertical navigation. VNAV path is a mode that controls the speed and altitude of the aircraft. We are in cruise with auto throttle engaged. Airspeed 264 knots. We already talked about the ground speed and the speed in Machs, which is a percentage of the speed of sound. And the decision height, which we estimated for landing, is 125 feet. Here's our altimeter, which is another steam gauge, basically, and vertical speed, which since we're in cruise, this is measured in feet per minute. Climbing or descending if it were below 0, and it should stay at 0 since we're in cruise. You've got the clock, and then you've got the backup gauges, artificial horizon, altimeter, airspeed indicator, auto brakes, which are used to slow down the aircraft on landing, and then you've got the MCP, which basically controls the autopilot. We've looked at some of this already, but you can specify different modes: LNAV, VNAV, which we have turned on. Flitch we'll look at in a second. You got the heading you can dial in, and you can either keep the heading you're currently on, dial in a heading to seek, and then you hit heading select. You can control the vertical speed if you want to. You'd hit this button right here. We've been dialing in the altitude the whole time. There are actually 3 autopilots. You need all 3. You need all 3 when you're on a auto land, or you don't necessarily need all 3, but you need at least 2. But while we're in cruise here, we just have the center in command, and then you have the localizer and approach, and then you have all the instrumentation on the same instrumentation on the first officer side. Then you have, of course, the dual FMSs, flaps. You have the throttle that controls the left and the right engines, the fuel controls, speed brake, which deploys those slats to destroy the lift of the aircraft and slow it down. The controls for the HSI, the trims, parking brake, and then you have the controls for the navigational and communication radios, as well as the transponder and the ILS, which will be dialing in more than likely, because I assume we're going to have an ILS approach, both the frequency and the runway heading. And we already looked at the ICAS. So wow, we actually got through, I think, everything we wanted to talk about, and we're looking at looks like we're 23 nautical miles, 3 minutes away from descent. So we'll take a quick pause and come back and prepare the cabin for our descent.